Conservation Commission's Wetlands Regulations process. Before I say anything else about what this meeting is and who else is in the room, I'm going to invite my colleague, Dr. Nina, to walk us through the interpretation services that we have with us today so that everyone can get on the right language channel for them. So Dr. Nina, I'll kick it to you.
And Lucy, I do need Star Luna to be co-host. Thank you while I do this. So thank you, everyone. Tonight we have interpretation in Spanish. And so you will see at the bottom of your screen a globe. As you see here on the bottom, it says interpretation. If you would do us the favor of clicking on that and then click the language of your choice. So if you're an English speaker, please select English. If you are a Spanish speaker, please select Español. If you are on a smartphone, where you would likely see it is you'll need to tap on the three dots, and then on that menu, you'll see, excuse me, a little globe that says language interpretation. Select that, and then select the language of your choice. For our interpreters, I'm going to go ahead and say this in Spanish. Si están en una computadora, miren la parte inferior de la pantalla y verán un pequeño símbolo de un globo. Hagan un clic en él, en ese globo, y luego seleccionen la idioma en que se sienten más cómodas. Si están en un teléfono, en su celular, hagan clic en los tres puntos de la parte inferior de la pantalla. Busque el pequeño globo y seleccione el idioma en lo que siente más cómoda. So please go ahead and get onto the language channel of your choice. All right. And so Peyton, we'll go ahead and select. If you are having any challenges, please put that in the chat and we will support you. Hand it back to you, Peyton.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Nina. Okay, so the purpose of this meeting today, this conversation, there are three core goals. The first is, I know some of you are extremely familiar with the Conservation Commission. Many of you serve as commissioners or have been a part of this process as part of the Equity Council or in other ways. But for some of you, this may be the first time you're really getting a stronger sense of what the Conservation Commission even does, what the Wetlands Ordinance is designed to do. So we're going to provide a little bit of that background context. Then we're going to walk through what this 6-month process over the last several months has looked like and how we have worked with an equity council along with a technical working group and an interagency working group to develop the draft regulations that are now available for public comment. And that leads us to the last piece. We will walk through those draft regulations. Alice will give us an overview of what's in the regs, what's new, what is different. And we'll walk through how you all can provide public comment. So that's our game plan. Before we go any further, I will kick it to Alice and her team to introduce themselves.
I'm Alice Brown. I'm the Director of Environmental Quality, and I work with the Conservation Commission team.
I'm Elena Itamari. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Conservation Commission.
Hi, my name's Dee Dee Hernandez, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Conservation Assistant.
Hi, my name is Max Hartledge, and I'm the Conservation Fellow.
And I'm Peyton Seiler-Jones. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the founder of Seiler Climate Consulting, and we're the consultant team that's been supporting the city of Boston for this process. And Demazia.
Hi, my name is Demazia Falcom. I use pronouns like she, her, and hers, and I'm a climate resilience planner with Seiler Climate Consulting.
And I'm Lucy Perkins. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Climate Resilience with Seiler Climate Consulting.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Nina Estrella Luna. I am with Star Luna Consulting, working with Seiler Climate Consulting on this project.
Honorable mentions, Belinda is on the call. Belinda is also part of the Star Luna team. They have been an integral part of this process and have surprised us with their presence. So Belinda, so glad you're here. Another honorable mention, Barbara with Noble Wickersham and Hart has been supporting some of the legal and regulatory elements. She's also not here, but she's been a part of the consultant team. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and my colleague Indamazia is going to begin sharing hers. My colleague Lucy is going to put in the chat 2 links to a poll everywhere. And if you've never used Poll Everywhere, it's pretty straightforward. You'll be able to click the link in your computer and start the survey. If you have any issues, pop that in the chat or come off mute. But this is just going to ask 3 really simple questions about who you are. And so we can start to get a sense of who else is in the room, because we won't do a full round of introductions. So I will stop sharing my screen, and Indamazia, you're already on it. So we have, as you can see in the chat, there are 2 versions of the survey, one in English, one in Spanish. Click on the link that's most relevant for you or most comfortable for you. And as responses start to roll in, we'll begin to see those on Indamazia's screen. Wow, a neighborhood with 2 words already broke Poll Everywhere. We have a Hyde Park, awesome. Dorchester, downtown Boston, East Boston, Seaport, Raleigh. Awesome showing from Dorchester. Heck yeah, we got a lot of Raleigh. Chinatown, great. Okay, they're really coming in now. The dance of the Boston neighborhoods. Okay, this is great. We see some Charlestown as well. Fantastic. Well, so glad we have folks from, West Roxbury in the room now. Okay, and then we have East Boston as well. Fantastic. All right, let's go to the next question, Indamazia, and see what responses are coming in. Okay, wow, this is really going to test my Spanish. Dr. Nina, why don't you read this question aloud? Great. Indamazia, do you mind going to the English response as well? Okay, great. So how are you showing up today? Are there certain roles or positionalities that you embody? So we have about half of the folks in the room are a Boston resident. We have a number of folks who were on one of the advisory boards. So for this particular process, that was the Equity Council, but also we had a technical working group and an interagency working group. So one of those, we have a handful of folks who serve on the Conservation Commission, fantastic. Some staff at nonprofits, a project proponent, great. And then a couple of folks who aren't sure. And that's also great. Really glad everyone is here. And then we have the 3rd and final question. So how much have you engaged in this process so far? So a lot of folks here have engaged a lot, and that is fantastic. We're going to have some Q&A and discussion components of this meeting today, and it'll be great to have your feedback and perspectives throughout those discussion components. There's a couple folks who, are kind of familiar, have looked through publicly available information. Maybe this will be a refresher. Maybe you'll leave with some new knowledge or information. And then a handful of y'all, this is really one of the first times that you're engaging in this process, or maybe one of the first times that you're engaging with the Conservation Commission at all. That is fantastic. We are so happy you're here. And hopefully the conversation today will fill in some of those learning opportunities, and we'll have opportunities for questions along the way. So let's go back to the Spanish survey, and then we'll switch back to the slides. Okay, so now that I know what this says, because I've seen the English, we have some Spanish speakers in the room who are very familiar with this process. That's awesome. I look forward to hearing what conversation takes place in the Spanish breakout room. And then if you can go back one question in Demasia, because I didn't know what it said before. So this is the one about, what's your kind of role? How are you showing up? And so we have some residents of Boston who are Spanish speakers. So fantastic. Great. Thank you all for indulging the poll everywhere. It's so great to get a sense of who is in the room. I will start sharing my screen again. And Elena, I'll kick it to you to kind of introduce the Conservation Commission.
Great. Thanks so much, Peyton. Happy to see you all here. As we've already touched upon, there's a range of folks in this room. So some of you may know what we're about to go over, some of you may not. But our hope is just to ensure that everyone is on a level playing field and sort of on the same page about what the Conservation Commission does before we jump into the more detailed information about the regulations. So as it says on the slide, the Conservation Commission enhances the quality of life in Boston by protecting and managing the wetland resource areas and open spaces in their area of responsibility. So what this means is that the Conservation Commission protects all wetland resource areas in the city of Boston by reviewing projects which have the potential to impact those resource areas. And the Conservation Commission also sometimes acquires parcels which are meant to be protected in perpetuity as open spaces used for passive recreation. I'll also note that the Conservation Commission is unique in that it's a municipal body charged with administering a state law. But of course, we also have our local ordinance. Next slide, please. The Conservation Commission has 4 key functions. The Conservation Commission are a group of 7 appointed members, and they also have the staff, which is made up of some of the folks that you've met here tonight, who also act on behalf of the Commission in some areas. The function that the Commission most commonly takes part in is reviewing and approving projects in jurisdictional areas. So this means that if someone wants to build a project or do work in or near a wetland or waterway, they have to get permission from the Conservation Commission to do so. The Commission decides if the project is safe for the environment or if project design changes are needed. In Boston, they also factor in flood risks from stormwater or sea level rise, as well as green infrastructure. Another thing that the Commission takes part in is responding to Wetlands Protection Act, WPA, or ordinance violations. So if someone performs unpermitted work or violates the WPA or ordinance in some other way, such as dumping or filling a wetland, the Commission can take legal action by demanding restoration of that resource area or issuing fines. The Commission also manages land owned by the Conservation Commission. So some city-owned parcels are owned and or managed by the Conservation Commission. These areas are preserved as open space and cannot be developed. Some of the parcels may contain wetlands and some do not. Lastly, the process we're engaged in here tonight, making and enforcing rules. So the Commission can create local environmental rules and work with other agencies to enforce them. That's what we're doing here today. Next slide, please. The Conservation Commission can make decisions within inland and coastal wetland resource areas. Sometimes these are in the water, sometimes they're near the water. Sometimes, as we'll discuss in a minute, they are areas that don't appear related to water in any capacity until suddenly they do when they're flooded. Our wetlands are crucial to controlling flooding and protecting Boston's neighborhoods and green spaces within the city. They also provide important ecological habitat for fish, shellfish, and wildlife. And wetlands maintain our groundwater and water quality. They also mitigate impacts of flooding, storm damage, and other pollution. And we know that flooding and storm damage are just going to become more critical as climate change progresses. We can move on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to go over a few examples of areas that are within the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. The Oh, sorry. The first one that we have here is land under ocean, which is exactly as its name implies, the land under the ocean. So in cases where somebody might be building a new pier or a new dock, the commission is taking into account how this work and then how the structure that is being proposed might cause changes to the ecosystem that exists on the ocean floor. Next slide. Here's an example that I mentioned earlier. So this is a portion of Long Wharf, which typically doesn't look like it should have anything to do with wetlands until it floods. So here you can see a photo of the Aquarium Tea Station in 2018. And this photo does a great job of exemplifying why this area is within the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction. So land which is sometimes dry, but will likely start flooding more frequently in the future, is also within the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. Next slide. Here we have a pond. We have a lot of ponds in Boston. Many of them look like this one. And the commission is concerned with any work that is happening within the pond, any work that may impact the water or potentially the land under the water. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that there is the 100-foot buffer to bank and land subject to flooding. So there are additional jurisdictional areas around what we would consider a more conventional wetland. And the commission is also interested in what is happening within 100 feet of this wetland and within the land subject to flooding, both of which have different boundaries around the pond. Next slide, please. Here we have the riverfront. So here's a photo from the Charles River Esplanade. The riverfront is currently 25 feet from the edge of the river, but of course that may change, as we'll discuss later in the proposed regulations. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that there are a lot of additional resource areas that are also subject to the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. You have, again, land underwater. You have the 100-foot buffer to bank, which is relatively self-explanatory, but is 100 feet from the bank of the river out in a parallel line. And we also have the waterfront area, which is a jurisdictional area that is specific to Boston. Next slide, please. We have the Belle Isle Salt Marsh, which I'm sure is familiar to many of you. It's in East Boston. There's also another salt marsh at the mouth of the Neponset River. And these are two areas that the commission is particularly invested in. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that there is also land under ocean and land subject to coastal storm flowage. So again, the point that I'm maybe driving home a little bit too much here is that in addition to what we see as our conventional wetlands, there are additional areas outside of those wetlands that the commission reviews projects for because they have the potential to impact the wetlands if they're close enough to them. And if we go to the next slide, we see here Carson Beach. So we have Coastal Beach, but then if we click to the next slide, we can see that there's also coastal dune off to the left, land subject to coastal storm flowage, which again is that area that may be flooding more frequently in coming years. And although it's not labeled here, there's land under ocean off to the right. So this has just been a brief overview of what is subject to the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction. Of course, it's missing a little bit of nuance, but I will pass it back over to Peyton now.
Awesome. Thanks, Elena. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this phase 3 regulations development has looked like. And then we're going to go into a couple of breakout rooms to ask clarifying questions, hopefully come off camera, and folks can be a little bit engaged with each other. So if you have questions, write them down or pop them in the chat, and we'll get to those in a few. So really briefly, just to kind of orient us all in time, as many of you know, the Wetlands Ordinance was passed way back in 2019. And so the process of developing the regulations and performance standards started soon after that and has been ongoing. There have been a lot of really, there's been a lot of really great work that's gone into working on drafts of these regulations. And most recently, for this process, we sort of restarted with the intention of finalizing these phase 3 wetlands regulations for a number of different areas that the Conservation Commission has jurisdiction. We'll get into all of that wonky language and sort of what those areas are in a little bit later in the presentation. But the main takeaway is we started this process most recently in January. We'll talk about what this process even means. But then, of course, we are now here in October. There are currently drafts of the regulations here today, October 29th, this info session about those draft regs and what went into them and how you can comment. The public comment will close on December 15th. More information about that as well in a few minutes. And in January, the Conservation Commission will have a special hearing to vote on adopting these draft regulations. So that's a really high level timeline. To get a little bit more into this process specifically, the folks who have been engaged in this, some of whom you just met, so you met the Conservation Commission staff, and others in the Environment Department with the city. You met some of the folks on the consultant team who's been supporting the facilitation process. And then other folks who are in the room, some of whom are in the room, some are not. But we had a equity council, which is a group of folks who live in environmental justice neighborhoods in Boston who have contributed significantly to this process. We had a group of, climate, wetland technical folks who have contributed to reviewing the draft regulations. And then we had an interagency advisory group with the city of Boston who provided really critical feedback at certain moments around, depending on their department, different elements of the work and what changes could be made to the regulations. So we're talking about regulations. Many of you are extremely familiar with what that means, but it's a little bit of a technical term. And so to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're even talking about tonight, the 2019 Boston Wetlands Ordinance is the law in the city. And this expanded the areas where the Boston Conservation Commission could have jurisdiction, or in other words, make decisions. And it directed the Conservation Commission to have regulations that addressed a couple new things, including climate change and environmental justice. So what this process of developing those regulations is basically like the how you can get a permit in a way that is in compliance with the Wetlands Ordinance that considers climate equity, environmental justice, and climate resilience. So basically what these regulations,
Peyton, just one, I know you can't see me, so slow down just a little bit. Slow down just a tiny bit.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I can see you. I have two screens, so the pleasure is mine. Okay. So the regulations are basically the pathway or the instructions for implementing the ordinance. So the drafts that we're going to be talking about tonight, these are potentially, after public comment, they will evolve, of course, but potentially the criteria that needs to be met in order for the Conservation Commission to give a permit. Does anyone on the Conservation Commission team or our resident legal scholar, Dr. Nina, want to add or clarify any of the technical or legal context here? Okay. I'm seeing a head shaking no. So we've already alluded some to this process, but this is just a visual way of representing that earlier in the year, we had the Equity Council, the technical group, the interagency group, taking the inputs from all of the past work that has happened on these regs and working to develop an environmental justice framework for the environmental justice regulations specifically. Then over the summer, that high level framework, which had values and goals that we'll get into in a second, began to be translated into specific strategies. So, okay, if this is our goal, if this is where we're going, what does that actually mean in terms of what people can and can't do in the Conservation Commission jurisdiction? And now we're in October. This is where we're working to refine, make sense of, and work towards finalizing those draft regulations. To get into even more of a level of detail of the process. What this process really was a collaborative governance process, which basically means everyone didn't have to be everything or know everything or do everything. We had really fantastic partners throughout this year who brought their unique expertise into the conversation. Specifically, the Equity Council. This was a group of folks who brought lived experiences in Boston. And that's a perspective that can often be left out of policymaking or really technical regulatory issues. But for this team, the City Conservation Commission team and the Environment Department and the folks who drafted the ordinance way back in 2019, it was a real priority and a goal to recognize the intersection of the Wetlands Ordinance with environmental justice, neighborhoods, and communities in Boston. So the role of this Equity Council was really to do a couple of critical things that nobody else could have done in the process. That was really sort of grounding in the shared purpose or the shared values. So early in the year, we worked with the Equity Council to establish what can this process be and what can it not be. And within that context, what are the core values that we want to ground within? Building on those values, holding those at the foundation, we then started to work with the Equity Council to ask, okay, where are we going? What are the goals and outcomes? What does success really look like in the context of environmental justice regulations? So by building out those goals and outcomes, we then had a framework to take to the technical folks and the policy folks and say, all right, so what are potential strategies building on these values, working towards these aims that we could put into these regulations? So the technical working group and the interagency working group through a process called Policy Delphi, which is essentially a way of moving towards consensus as a group through a series of digital surveys. They worked on this set of potential strategies. We then brought the strategies back to the Equity Council, to the environmental justice folks, and we said, what are we getting right here? What are we getting wrong? Further edited, further iterated on those strategies. And that's what made its way into the draft regulations that you see today. So, or that you will see today when Alice gets into it later. So all of that context, I know it's like a lot of information about the how, but the reason that we're getting into this process is because it really does shape the outcomes of what you're going to see in the regulations. And it reflects the values of the city team and the folks, again, the folks who drafted the ordinance to begin with, to really try to make sense of the ways that environmental justice and equity could really be at the center of this process, both in terms of the process and the outcomes. So just to give you a really quick glimpse into what some of those values and goals actually were, the goals that the Equity Council created are represented here in these 6 points. So accountability was a big one, recognizing that our current conditions in the city of Boston are shaped by things that happened a long time ago, policy decisions, planning decisions, and those harms and spatial and material realities continue to shape people's lives today. And so holding that and being accountable to that history is one value. Respect is another big value, recognizing that communities need to be treated with dignity and to be, considered having the wetlands resources in the entire city be considered as resources that need to be protected. Another value was environmental justice, recognizing that not every community in Boston looks the same. There are reasons for that. We want to consider not equal treatment, but equitable treatment. So what does it mean to really center the environmental justice communities in Boston. Community health and well-being. This one I think is really at the heart of a lot of this work. We want to make people's neighborhoods and places that they live, places that have dignity and are treated with respect, and the ecosystems are healthy so that the people can be healthy and thrive. So this community health and well-being was a core value. Transparency is another really critical value, wanting the whole process to be accessible, inclusive, safe. And the final one is community power, recognizing that there are ways that process can shift and evolve over time to give folks the opportunity to step into the power that they already have. So if a process is not accessible to someone, then there's no way that they can have power and agency over that process. So wanting to have all of this sort of lead towards the opportunity for everyone to have power and say in this case, the Conservation Commission's important work. Some of the goals that then kind of came out of those values, you're going to see they fall into 4 different buckets. So one of the buckets from the framework is around outreach and engagement. So a lot of this will be familiar to you. So wanting there to be multiple and easily accessible opportunities for public notice about projects, education, feedback early in the process, ensuring that the community needs that are heard and that emerge through those opportunities are recorded and then explicitly responded to and integrated into permitting decisions so that folks know that their feedback really impacted the process and the outcomes. Allowing residents of Boston to really be engaged in permitting decisions that shape their neighborhood and having the confidence within the process to shape those outcomes. And then identifying the synergies across city permitting and planning processes. So not wanting to overburden anyone through doing this process. Another sort of set of the goals was the equity-centered process and practices. So one is about outreach engagement. The other one is about the processes of the commission and the Conservation Commission team. So one is around wanting to really ensure that the regulations intentionally require that EJ communities receive equitable treatment. So that's a clear and defined goal. The Conservation Commission, internally has a clear understanding of what community needs are and desires are and integrates that into decision-making. A really standardized and differentiated protocol for accommodating unique community and unique neighborhood contexts. And then the final one here is reducing that regulatory redundancy. And again, identifying those synergies, especially with other levels of government, like the state government. And then the final 2 categories here are one around decision-making and outcomes. So this one, Alice is going to get into some of this a bit more when she's talking through the specifics of the regulation, but essentially requiring that proponents that have not gone through other city permitting processes consider community benefits defined by environmental justice communities, and that communities who might be disproportionately impacted by climate change or impacted by the project or activity seeking a permit are really accounted for in the decision and the outcome. A measurable increase in climate resiliency and reductions to vulnerability to climate impacts, especially in environmental justice communities. And then the final one here that is a goal is incorporating cumulative impacts beyond the single project. And then the final section here is around evaluation and monitoring. So this is about working towards establishing transparent reporting, monitoring, and evaluation that acknowledges historical environmental impacts and injustices, and works towards tracking progress towards remediating and redressing those injustices. Dr. Nina, thank you for continuing to slow me down. So that was a lot of me talking at you and a lot of information. And a lot of you in the room have really critical additional context to add because you've been a part of this process. And some of you may have questions, clarifying questions. So we are going to break into 3 breakout groups. You will be invited to 2 breakout groups that leave this main room. If you want to be in a Spanish language conversation, please stay in the main room with Dr. Nina and Dee Dee and our fabulous interpreters. Everyone else who wants to be involved in a discussion or breakout in English, accept your invitation to go to one of 2 breakout rooms. We'll be in those rooms for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together and answer some emergent themes, questions that come up as themes in each of the conversations. All right, Lucy, take it away. So entering the main room again, you're going to have to select your channel. So flashing this up briefly, select Spanish or English. And Ken, I know you were right in the middle of saying something in our breakout room, so sorry you got cut off.
So I was kind of responding to Judith's example of the seaport flooding and Pat saying that can't the Conservation Commission own it? I was discussing that it is in, are we still on? It's incredibly expensive property. And frankly, if that area gets devastated by future inundation, which I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it's prone to flooding. It's going to be more prone to flooding in the future. Those people have money. Those people can take care of it. What's more important is the poor neighborhoods that flood. There's nobody to rebuild them. Those are the areas where, and I'm glad that the Conservation Commission's paying attention to environmental justice, which is a double-edged sword. But I just wanted to point out that the seaport is very well represented by money, and the Conservation Commission could never come up with enough money to own it. And there's other areas that really need protection from flooding, and it's where people can't help themselves because they don't have the money.
Thanks for finishing your thought, Ken, from the breakout room. So I'm seeing the notes from the other conversations, and it looks like there were some really great questions. So we're going to use this time to share out some of the questions from the smaller groups that maybe others would want to hear the answers to, or maybe the facilitator wasn't totally sure what the answer would be. So one of the questions that came up in another breakout room was, will there be any more meetings about the draft regulations with commissioners before the comment period ends? Alice, do you want to jump in and talk about other opportunities for engagement between now and December 15th?
Yeah, I don't believe that we will have another hearing, which is what we have to have if the commissioners are formally discussing the regs. So we have to have a special hearing for that. Obviously, the commissioners can decide to have discussions during their commission hearings. And there are some commissioners present tonight who might be able to answer questions if they come up later. I believe at this point we are likely to have a second round of comments. So I think that discussion around the draft regulation, like the second draft, will maybe be the time that happens, but it won't be before this first. Our current plan is not to have another special hearing before the first comment period deadline. If we have requests for office hours or other forums outside of a hearing, we could provide that sort of accessibility answering questions. But in terms of the commission answering questions, it would be the commissioners would have to ask us to have another special hearing if they didn't want to talk about it during a regularly scheduled hearing because of public meeting and information laws that we have to follow. It's a long and convoluted answer.
Thanks, Alice. And thanks, Dr. Nina, for adding that to the question list. So a question that came up in my breakout group was clarifying, wait, does the Conservation Commission and this wetlands ordinance have jurisdiction over publicly owned land as well as privately owned land? And the answer is yes. That's a great clarifying question. So even other local government departments within the city or the state still are within the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. Alice, would you want to add any other context for that question?
I mean, I think it's true, both public and private projects are reviewed by the commission, and that includes, the US Coast Guard has had us come look, review projects, and we've gone and done inspections of their completed project. So it is standard practice for everyone in the wetland jurisdiction areas to go through the process.
Great.
Question. Is there an example? Is there an example where the commission has denied permitting that we can know about?
Alice, do you want to jump in on this one?
This is a situation where I'm a little bit curious if some of the past conservation agents on the call have more experience with denials. In the time in which I have been at the city, there have been projects that needed to come back multiple times to the commission for a whole series of hearings, sometimes as long up to a year's worth of presenting materials or going back and doing research before they could get their permit based on iterations of the process. But in the time that I have been at the city for a little less than 2 years, there have not been projects that have come, followed all the procedures, been asked to review, and then been denied. Everyone that I've seen has reviewed to a place where the commission gave them a permit. But often it can be a very iterative process to get there. And again, there are some historic knowledge keepers on the call if anyone wanted to share a denial scenario.
If you would like a history lesson, there were certain projects that came up, and typically what happens instead of an outright denial, the issue is the actual order of conditions that has conditions that the applicant is not necessarily happy with, which tends to you go to the next step and do an appeal. The only recollection I have of denying a wetland permit was for the Malibu Street Back to the Beaches program, which was a Metropolitan District Commission project where they're rehabilitating Boston beaches. And the project was impacting salt marsh. The commission did not have the authority to issue that proper order, so we had to deny it.
Yeah, and
Thanks,
Alex, I
Ken.
can only recall one instance when I was administrator project. I think it was a single family residential adjacent to the Stony Brook Reservation, right in bordering vegetated wetland, and there was no restoration plan or anything related to mitigating impacts. So I think in that case, the commission voted to deny, again, given the sensitivity of that specific resource area. But I think that was the only one that was denied in my years on the commission.
And I thank you, Chris, because I live in the middle of the Stony Brook Reservation.
Thank you,
Chris,
thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the historic knowledge. It's fun to have former Conservation Commission staff members on the call. So a question in the chat is, will there be a second comment period after December 15th?
I would say that we are tentatively anticipating one if the commission staff, if the commissioners believe that commission staff has responded adequately to the first round of comments and submitted a second draft of the regulations that meets their standards, they would vote to approve. But if they think that there have been substantive enough changes that we should put it out for a second set of public comments, we have created a tentative calendar for doing that.
Great. And then Ken, you popped in the chat, is the ordinance applicable to state and federal agencies? And the answer is still yes. So public projects, regardless of what level of government. Great
I would
question.
say it depends.
Okay,
When
great.
agencies interpret their legislative rights differently. Some agencies comply with local ordinances. Some have gotten uniquely catered to them orders of condition that understand the scope and scale of their work, but they're still filing under the local ordinance. And some elect to do, some like they sort of elect what they're doing. We definitely have less legal teeth with the state and federal agencies with the local ordinance, but they are all filing under the Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act that has a lot of protections and provisions. And the new EJ regs provide, as well as the guidance document that we'll provide as well, gives all of those agencies the ability to do the things that you, Judith, and others on the Equity Council have recommended as best practices for outreach and communication and translation, et cetera. Many of them, though, have gone through some other public process before coming to CONCOM. So some of that transparency is built into most publicly owned land projects.
Thanks, Alice. It was somewhat rhetorical on my end, but I wanted to hear what the position was.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Alice. So the final question that I'm seeing that came up in a breakout room is actually the perfect segue into the next section of the conversation and discussion. Someone asked, is there a size limit or a threshold in terms of projects for the types of projects that need to comply with these regulations? And so the next section of this conversation, Alice is really going to get into the weeds on the different regulations. But before I kick it to Alice, I do want to just pause and say, were there any clarifying questions that have not been elevated yet, or that I missed in the chat that anyone wants to come off mute and ask to help understand the context and the process? Okay. Well, don't hesitate to raise your hand and we can pause and answer if anything comes up. Alice, I'll kick it to you.
Thanks, Peyton. If you are a fellow audio learner or visual learner who doesn't want to read all the regs, I'm doing a 8 to 10 minute version of something that we have recorded as a 30-minute version. So you can also watch the recording from 2 weeks ago if you want more slides than this and a longer version of me talking. You will find in the draft regulations that there are 6 sections identified. They are given Roman numerals on these slides as well as color coding, because depending on how the commission decides that they want things to be sequenced or how we insert them into the existing regulations, they may get different Roman numerals. So rather than having a million Roman numerals that we might have to change in the draft document, wherever you see a Roman numeral on these slides, you will just see one of these colors. So that's just a weird color coding thing I want to flag for everyone up front. I also want to note, I'll talk through each of these sections with you. All of them come out of the ordinance. And so it's really that guiding document that was passed by City Council and signed by the mayor in December of 2019 that is shaping why these are the things that we now have new sections for. Next slide, please. The definitions, there are already some definitions in the regulations that have been published. These are additional definitions that you'll find. Many of the words used here mean a lot of things, and you may want us to define them more broadly or more narrowly given your perspective on the regulations, but we've wanted the language to remain as consistent as possible with other places you might find the language in legal documents. So where there's a definition in the Boston Wetlands Ordinance, it is included here. Where something is in the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act office regulations, or MEPA, we've tried to be consistent with that, as well as the state wetland regulations that we're building off of. Those are in the 310 CMR. That's what the numbering system is for those regulations. Like I said, many of these things are more broad in your personal use or might be more narrow in your personal use, but we're trying to match these definitions to other places where you'll find them in legal regulations that you might overlap with in this process. Next slide, please. The climate change adaptation and resilience regulations broadly apply to all of the almost all of the projects that are going to come in. The level of detail may vary by the size of project, but we want the project proponents, when they're submitting an application, to be considering how impacts of climate change will affect the project moving forward. Those impacts include things like heat, types of water flooding, whether it's falling from the sky or coming at you from the ocean, as well as drought. So it's where there's more water and also where there's less water. And it's for approximately 50 years. We recognize that the models available now will be updated iteratively, but there may be times in which the best data we have is only 40, 45 years in the future, and other times that we might have a 60-year model looking further forward. So we're asking applicants to put in information. What is the data for how this is being impacted today, and what are the potential future impacts from climate change, and how are you planning for that? It might be in the types of trees you plant, it might be in the elevation of the land around a site, it might be in the way that stormwater is captured and held or released. You just want to consider these factors when applying.
A friendly reminder for all of our
slow down.
speakers to slow down just a little bit. Thank you, Alice.
Yeah. I want to note that in the regulations, it starts out with some pretty strict rules, but there are clear sections that explain that if you are doing work that aligns with the city's resilience planning efforts, it doesn't give you a pass, but it gives you a move through the process more smoothly and quickly, because you can just say, we're doing what this plan said. And there's a whole list of planning documents in the regulations to point to that. So if you're doing a piece of a berm that might be a little bit awkward by itself, if you can point to how it's part of an infrastructure plan that you're implementing on behalf of the city, those are the kinds of things that can help make a project that would be clunky going through the process move more smoothly, because you're being consistent with work the city is doing to support adaptation and resilience more broadly. Next slide, please. The environmental justice regulations, Peyton described the process that we used to develop them. This is really focusing on ensuring that environmental justice communities are appropriately protected, informed, and empowered to be decision makers. There are regulations listed out in the document, as well as references to guidance documents that we're creating to help people standardize best practices for communicating with members of the public, sharing information, explaining why things are happening the way they are, particularly close to regulated areas that are also overlapping with those environmental justice jurisdictions or census tracts. If we go to the next slide, I want to highlight that we thought a lot about where these needed to apply the most. There are types of filings with the Conservation Commission that we haven't talked about tonight called requests for determinations of applicability. Those are typically much lower impact, temporary types of work, and we're not asking for additional requirements on those. For things that are sort of light touch, particularly that are already happening in parks or research projects or in areas that are paved and staying paved, we're calling those, just in this slide, minimal impact NOIs. Those would also not have to go through a lot of additional outreach. When we get to the next section, where we're thinking about how projects that have already been through public processes, maybe they're bigger, but they've been through a public process, we want to amplify that information. So we're asking proponents to provide information about their previous processes, either how they got to the decision that they did, are there people that they want to, who were involved in the process, that they want to let them know, hey, we're going to be at Concom now, we're closer to construction, this is where our designs are. We're encouraging that kind of outreach, but we're not saying you have to do any, you've already been doing outreach, you've already been meeting with the community, then we want just to be just the next step in the process. If a project is a large scale but hasn't had that interaction with the public yet, that's the point at which we want the most focus, so that if project that hasn't public vetting is able to then provide information ideally to the public before Concom and then come to Concom, so that the members of the public are not learning about the process for the very first time in the middle of a hearing and trying to just understand the larger ramifications beyond the Concom jurisdiction, so we can focus again on those wetland resources and climate impacts. So there's more about that in the regs, but I wanted to sort of show it diagrammatically here, how we are trying to differentiate types of projects. Everything on this slide, which you'll see on the slide deck posted, that we'll post online, are samples that came out of applications we've gotten in the last 18 months. Next slide, please. The Coastal Flood Resilience Zone looks at areas that are inland from existing land subject to coastal storm flowage that may be inundated by floodwaters up to in about 50 years. The current models give us about 50 years to 2070. And there are two types of models that we could use to look into the future out to 2070. One of those was developed by the state. It's called the MCFRM, or the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. That model makes a set of assumptions about storms that are really nuanced, but it also says, what if the dam at the Charles River is overtopped and all of Back Bay floods? The other models that we have look at a smaller set of storm types, and were used to create the outline of the Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay District that is now used for zoning by the Planning Department. While there are benefits to using MCFRM, and we would encourage applicants to look at those models when doing their own climate planning, the Coastal Flood Resilience Zone is going to be coterminous or have the same geographic boundary as CFROD, in order to ensure that people are going through a parallel process and not making permitting more complicated as you go through different city processes. Within this zone, there are 3 separate sections. There's a near term, which is LSCSF up to any additional land that could flood by 2030. Then there's a 2030 to 2050 midterm. And there's a 2050 to 2070 long term. So we've differentiated those zones, and the midterm and long-term zones will be developing an administrative approval process for them, recognizing that they might not have the flooding impacts for a while. So we'll have ways to review those processes without review those projects without having necessarily a full hearing, unless a project has some complicating factor where the Conservation Commission staff, full commission, should review it. Next slide, please. The Inland Flood Resilience Zone is outlined in the ordinance, and so we've created regulations for it as well. It is areas where extreme precipitation may occur and create inland flood areas that go beyond existing mapped FEMA data. However, we are waiting for the Boston Water and Sewer Commission model to be fully developed. So there's not a map yet that goes with these regulations, and we recognize that that may make it harder to consider the long-term ramifications for this, but we've outlined what we believe are the best regs we have with the future model that will come out. The final section, next slide, please, is an extended riverfront. According to the Massachusetts state regulations that apply to all 361 cities and towns of Massachusetts, the riverfront area is 200 feet. However, those same regulations list 14 communities where the riverfront is only 25 feet, and the ordinance asks the commission to consider extending up to 200 feet. So in this section, you will see that areas that have not been developed have a riverfront extended up to 200 feet or the first public right of way. And so that means that there are going to be areas that are not yet developed along riverfronts that have existing permeable surfaces, vegetation, habitat that are now going to be protected beyond what the current regulations say for Boston, but they are designed to be consistent with the other 361 minus 14 communities currently allow. I can do that math, but I'm not going to get it wrong on recorded television. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, I don't have a map. So now we are in discussion 2. Peyton, I will turn it back to you.
Do you want to show this map, Alice? Is this what you were thinking? One
So
of
we
these?
have just a couple diagrams that we can share if people have questions about the wetlands regs, about where things apply. So we can pop to that, but I think it's okay to go to a question.
Okay, that sounds great. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen in that case, because we're going to move into the second round of questions, but this time stay as a full group. So reminding myself and others to speak slowly, as the interpreters are doing an amazing job. So we'll kick off with the questions that have come in the chat, and then invite others to raise your hand or pop in the chat additional questions. So Lisa, I believe it was you, there were a number of questions around accountability and enforcement of these regulations. So I'm going to name a couple of them, and then Alice, kick it to you to start, and then others can add on additional info. So the questions are, who is ensuring that developers are in fact sticking to what they agreed to do? Who is ensuring that developers are providing accurate evidence of existing conditions and then enforcing those?
So historically, when you file for a permit, it becomes recorded on the deed for the land. That has always been true. And in order to take that encumbrance off of the deed, you need a certificate of compliance that shows that you have adhered to the things in your permit. Those have always required site visits and continue to require site visits. Separate from the regulations, the current Conservation Commission staff made the executive decision at the end of 2023 to do site visits for new filings as well. So in terms of your question about how do you know if a project is representing their land accurately, the commission staff has been out there, they're taking photographs, they're documenting things that they're sharing with the commission so that people are getting the best possible understanding of existing conditions as well. So that's a new practice separate from the regs that is in effect. And again, in order to remove the encumbrance, projects have to come and get the certificate of compliance, which requires site visits. Frequently, site visits uncover small changes in site design or in what was permitted. And when not compliant, the commission staff provides that feedback and they're not able to get a COC until they come into compliance.
Thanks, Alice. And thanks, Lisa, for those questions. Feel free to add follow-up questions in the chat after hearing from Alice. So Stacy, Zach, and then Ken, I'll kick it to you. So Stacy's question here is there a map that shows where the extended riverfront area is likely to be?
Yes, but we are still trying to figure out how to make it publicly accessible because it lives on a city map that is designed to be logged in as a city worker. So we are working on a shareable version.
Transparency. Okay, great. Thanks, Alice. So Zach, I understand IMCAM is working on language to use for RFPs. Is that a Conservation Commission initiative? I have the same question about compliance. For instance, could there be a standardized RFP?
Zach, you've used a lot of acronyms. Can you come off mute and clarify?
Hello, sorry. Massachusetts Climate Action Network. And so I don't know, the reason I say I'm not sure about compliance is I don't understand how, if they come up with some precursor great language to put into RFPs, how would they police that as well? I guess is sort of the same question.
I think I don't know what the scenario is that you're describing.
basically requests for proposals before a project.
Right.
What
So
they're
I don't,
looking to,
yeah,
what they're looking to do is put some of their language of their initiatives and their missions into the RFP language, but I don't know how it would make it into everyone, I guess. So I was wondering if the regulations here, how they would be policed, I guess.
I guess projects, I'm still not totally sure how the two are connected. When a project is filed with us,
Yes.
if they're describing their climate impact, hopefully
Right.
they're not writing it for the first time when they write to us, because at some other point in the process, they've already described their climate impacts, but they have to be locally specific to that project. So
Okay.
if there's more language that's starting out like in RFPs where people are understanding for a given site the kinds of climate impacts the project might have, it's great that they're thinking about it earlier in the process, but there's not a lot of boilerplate language I can imagine describing that, you know, could be universally used to describe the
Right.
climate impacts of, say, a project on the East Boston waterfront and a project next to a Mattapan, I was thinking Mattapan Urban Wild, a Mattapan wetland, right? Like they
I
would
get
need
it, yeah.
different descriptions. So
I get it.
thinking
I
about
think
climate, great, but the application would probably still be different by the time it got to us.
I think I just made you repeat what you said earlier on at the beginning of the
No. I think this was
Okay.
helpful.
All right.
Zach, thanks for the question though, because I feel like it ties back to the initial, like the core value of identifying opportunities for synergies. So I like the line of thinking. So we'll do Ken, and then Judith will answer your questions in the chat. Lisa, go to you, and then we can look for others. So go ahead, Ken.
Thanks. I actually have two things to say. I was hoping Stacy was going to hit on it when she had her hand up first. In defense of the professionals that help developers do these filings, an existing conditions plan is typically affixed with a professional registration stamp by the land surveyor. And so that's them putting their professional license on the line, just saying this is accurate. Now, that survey will pick up the wetland flags or GPS points for the wetland delineation. And when there's a question on that delineation, that's an appropriate time to do a site visit to see if it's indeed consistent with what's on the plan. And at the other end of the process for a certificate of compliance, it's typically submitted with a professional attestment by a professional registered engineer stating that everything was done in compliance with the order, listing any exceptions to that. But that's not why I had my hand up. I
Thank you
saw
for
a
those
quick
clarifications, Ken. Those were really helpful.
I saw a quick flash of your description of the riverfront area. And what caught my eye was you were measuring from mean high water. And rivers have ordinary high water, unless you're talking about a coastal situation. And you know, if it's tidally influenced, it'll have mean high water. But rivers don't have mean high water, they have ordinary high water, right? It's just a clarification, because I always think of mean high water as the ebb and flow of the tide, which in Boston is a 10 feet swing. That would create a lot of problems trying to figure out where the riverfront area is. But there you go. Mean annual high water line. That's kind of a coastal description. So
It is pulled from 310 CMR. I don't even know what section I'm in, page 225. The riverfront area of land between a river's mean annual high water line measured horizontally outward. So
okay, well, I stand corrected, but that's how I look at it.
I can add to that if you'd like very quickly.
Go ahead, Stacey.
As a
Yeah.
wetland scientist.
Yes.
So yes, it is the mean annual high water. Ken, you're right. Mean high water would be coastal. And then the Wetlands Protection Act defines what characteristics you look at that constitutes mean annual high water in terms of vegetation, soil, etc. So and then the Army Corps uses ordinary high water. So just to confuse everything.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Ken, for the fantastic question. And thank you, Stacy, for bringing in your expertise. It's really great. So Judy asked a couple of questions. One, how does the Conservation Commission intersect with Boston Water and Sewer Commission, if at all, and why? And then the other question is there a list of all of the Boston wetlands, or perhaps a map that talks about the jurisdiction of the wetlands ordinance?
Boston Water and Sewer Commission tells Concom when they're doing maintenance work on their conduits, pipes, when they're under roadways, when they're doing work outside of existing roadways in jurisdictional areas, then they have to go through more process. And when they are installing brand new pipes that have never been there in jurisdictional areas, they
En
go
las
through
áreas
a
jurisdiccionales,
full process.
en todo el proceso.
Octavio, you are on the English channel.
Oh,
Alice,
Yeah,
is there not also an intersection there where the wetland filing the notice of intent requires a stormwater management report? And typically Boston Water and Sewer Commission will review the stormwater design for any project. And not to mention their chief engineer is on the Conservation Commission.
Those are great addendums. I was waiting for Octavio to switch, and I appreciate that you articulated it more efficiently than I could have.
Can I add one
Okay.
more item?
Yes, go ahead.
Often a standard item in our order of conditions, depending on the type of project, is sign off from Boston Water and Sewer. So if for some reason they hadn't been consulted on a project before it came to us, that would happen at the latest before work begins.
Awesome. And then the map question.
Yeah, in fact, I think this is maybe an opportunity for us to add some features to our Developing the Wetlands Regs website. You can see all of our existing jurisdiction through knowing what to turn on and off on a mass map viewer. And I think we can provide a how-to for that so you can see all of those things. It really is along rivers and streams and coastlines. But there are definitely places where you would be surprised that there's jurisdiction, a little bit, again, for that land subject to flowage, coastal storm flowage, or land subject to flooding. And then I think what surprises the most people, but I think many advocates on this call are very well versed in it, are the places where a brook exists, not in a culvert, but in a place that it has become entirely invisible to the general public. So I'm tagging this as a Concom activity. We can get something up, and then we'll let folks know that those tools for how to look at existing maps will give you directions for that.
And if I may, yeah, so you touched on it, Alice, where I was really concerned about the hidden parcels, maybe even the nature center has a wetland that's right in the middle, and most folks wouldn't even consider that. So yeah, pieces like that I would be interested in knowing where they're located. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith and Alice. Lisa, thanks for your patience. Jump on in. Lisa, if you...
Okay,
yeah.
okay, I found it. I found
Awesome.
Okay, yes, I just, my follow-up to my previous questions about enforcement and accountability, I didn't have it's not concise enough to just type it into the chat. Yeah, so I had asked about, who's overseeing that the developer is providing accurate, evidence-based information about existing conditions, and also who's overseeing enforcing that whatever was promised and approved is actually, getting done in the way that it's supposed to be. And I'm asking these questions after just so many years of having developers who come to our neighborhood, our environmental justice neighborhood, along American Legion and Commons, and lying, just lying. And it's been up to neighbors, to like go and take pictures, and then when there's when there's opportunity to give feedback, which is getting reduced at this point, to try to I don't want to say push back, but just protect our diminishing natural assets. And I have participated in so many Conservation Commission hearings, and I love them. I really love them. And at so many of them, it just doesn't go the way, it has not gone the way of protecting the natural assets. It has not gone the way of pushing back against mischaracterizations by the developer. It has not gone the way of, several times we had, or like, a developer's lawyer showing up at the conservation hearing and threatening to grieve if the Concom doesn't, approve, or, it's you can hear the frustration. We've had the Concom say that they don't have the jurisdiction, or BPDA didn't have the jurisdiction to do site visits when we know that they do. So my concern here isn't so much about what's written in these regulations, but what is being done to fix these really serious gaps that have been very destructive. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa, for the question. Alice and Elena, do you want to jump in and share some initial thoughts?
I guess the regulations come with additional guidance documents that we're developing. Dr. Nina has said all along, just because the people on staff now see meaning a certain thing, you have to also create the documentation to say forever, these are the practices and the standards that we're using. So we are trying to record that, standardize that. We've updated everything from the filing guide to, again, Elena made the executive decision to do the site visits that she does now that didn't happen before. But the Conservation Commission it's absolutely relevant to the areas you're describing along American Legion, but can't substitute for the work of other agencies when it comes to things, because some things, like we said, are not under Conservation Commission jurisdiction. Where it is along a brook, and the Commission's jurisdiction today is limited to that 25-foot waterfront, plus some other things, but not a lot. That's a place where extending the riverfront to 200 feet can have an impact. But as noted in previous commenters, these things are only good in the future, so we can't undo past harms, and we're highly cognizant of that, and appreciate both your frustration and the limitations that we are doing our best to overcome but cannot universally solve.
Dr. Nina, I know Alice referenced you and some of what you talk about and think about here. So do you want to add anything else before we move on from the questions?
Only that, so Lisa, your frustration is my frustration. This is why I do the work that I do in helping organizations like the Conservation Commission who really want to do exactly what you are asking for, that doing the right thing, repairing as much harm as can be possible, and preventing further harm in the future. And at the same time, even in that ideal world that we're going to be, that this staff is trying to create, it is still sadly going to require oversight, and it's still going to require our participation, and it's still going to require that we still be engaged, and hopefully more in a collaborative way than in the sort of adversarial way that we've had to as EJ communities. We've had to be that way in the past. And so on the one hand, you are right. This is everything that you've experienced and that I've experienced is not right. And also, even in the ideal world, we are still going to have to be involved in making sure that that future Conservation Commission with different leadership that will come down the pike understands that there's going to be people who are watching what they do, and that we want to collaborate with them to make sure that everything is being done in support of the health, the safety, and the resilience of our communities.
Thank you, Dr. Nina. These are fantastic questions. We're going to start shifting gears into how to provide public comment on the regulations we just talked about. But before we go into this final section, Alice, go ahead.
I'm just going to share my screen quickly to sort of answer Judith's question. This is one of those maps that we have yet to figure out how to make it publicly shareable without a City of Boston login. Give me 1 second. And I'm just going to share a version that truly just highlights in blue where the Boston Conservation Commission has jurisdiction. So unsurprisingly, it's along coastlines and rivers. It is further inland where flooding is predicted. It is also on the islands. We don't get a lot of filings out there, but we do get some, particularly from DCR. And then to do this question, we have, if you zoom in, you can see where these various streams and brooks are not culverted in lower parts of southern parts of Boston. And again, a lot of them do exist in places like the Stony Brook Reservation, which is generally protected by the fact that it is DCR parkland, but others run along various roadways where then they become places that people may consider developing. And these were places that will become thicker lines if the riverfront area is extended as a result of these draft regulations.
Thank you, Alice. Any final question, not final, but any questions right now that you want to say before we kick it to Dee Dee to talk about providing public comment? Feel free to raise your hand or go off mute.
Put it in the chat, and it's my last question. It was about the buffer. So when Alice mentioned, I think for one particular thing, it was 25 feet for the riverfront, I think, and then for the wetlands, it was like 100 feet. And so I'm wondering, when was that established, and could that be looked at to have an extension, right? Instead of maybe 100, make for the wetlands, make it 200, and for the riverfront, make it 100. It's just an example. I'm not really sure what the methodology was to determine what that buffer zone was and looks like and when it was done. And so could we revisit that to see if maybe it needs an extension?
A lot of these 100-foot buffers are established either in state or city laws, and so they weren't part of the regulation writing process. And the ordinance is pretty clear that the buffer to bank and the riverfront overlap and are not stacked. The question that we have, which is highlighted here, is where the waterfront goes. If you take a very literal interpretation, it is the 25 feet past the 200 feet, but it is hard to describe a place that is 225 feet from any water as waterfront. So we're evaluating how that should be characterized or stacked or measured.
Judith, fantastic question. Alice, thanks for responding. Dee Dee, I'm going to kick it to you to move us into our final section about how to provide public comment. And then at the end of that, we will have another open floor session of Q&A. So you can ask questions about how to submit comment or any other questions about anything we've talked about today. So Dee Dee, I will kick it to you.
Great, thank you. If you can move to the next slide, please. Great. So just a reminder on upcoming dates and deadlines. We're at the October 29th community info session, and the commission had voted to open a 60-day public comment period, which will be ending at 5 p.m. on December 15th. And there are 2 ways that we're accepting public comments at this time. And if Peyton can go to the next slide, please. Great. So first way is to submit a formal comment letter to cc@boston.gov. And then the second way is to fill out a Google form. And that lives on our Developing Wetlands Regulations page at the moment, which I believe someone from the project team is going to share it in the chat. Thank you, Lucy.
just did.
Thank you. Looks like my video's paused. 1 second here. Perfect. Great. So yes, submitting a letter to cc@boston.gov or filling out the Google form will be great. And on the next slide, I'll just speak a little bit to what we would like to see from comment letters and also when filling out the Google form. We would love for everyone to be as specific as possible, making sure that you reference sections or subsections on the draft regulations. We want to make sure we're not misinterpreting anything. And we want to make sure that we're being as specific as possible with your comments and making sure that nothing is misinterpreted again. So yes, for each section, if you can just provide feedback, explaining your support, concerns about the regulations, maybe any experiences that you want to highlight, and then also questions. So, and just a reminder again, we will need these comments no later than 5 p.m. on December 15th, just to make sure we have enough time before the holidays and the New Year's to make sure that all of your comments are included in the draft regulations. And I'll pass it back to Peyton.
Great. Thank you, Dee Dee. So that's it for all of our presentation. We will use the remaining 17 minutes or so for any additional questions that folks have for Dee Dee about how to submit a public comment, to Alice about the details of the regs, to anyone else on the project team about this process and how we got to some of these ideas. Anything at all, pop it in the chat, go off mute, raise your hand. And I'll stop sharing this now that you know we're doing Q&A so we can see each other a little bit better again. Alana, go ahead, jump in.
Thank you. Where can we find the draft regs to download them again?
Great question. If someone else from the project team can pop that in the chat, that would be great. And we can also email it, Alana, to you afterwards if that would be
great. That would be great. Thank you, Peyton.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Well, I suppose this is what happens if we ask questions throughout the meeting. Any closing thoughts from anyone else who's been involved in this process? I know there's still some folks from the Equity Council here, other folks from the project team. Anything you might want to add here at the end as we wrap up?
So this may be a little off script, but I want you guys to consider, since this is the Conservation Commission, I've been researching deep pavement, and so I just want to leave that on the table. just to make sure that we're thinking about freeing up some natural spaces that we've hoarded in the city and won't allow us to grow. And so please consider that as an option. And again, thank you for doing this. This was absolutely amazing. And I'm just really convinced that this is a better way to move forward and as a community. So again, thank you guys.
I got a tickle in my throat right when you were speaking, Judith, but thank you for all of your work on this process and being part of the Equity Council. Great. I have tears in my eyes. Alice, any closing thoughts on your end?
They've popped off now, but I really appreciate that there are past conservation agents who were on the call earlier who were able to share their expertise. And I want to really honor that they were working under a different regulatory regime. They didn't have the local ordinance as a tool to do some of this, and they're continuing to do work in wetland protection. So even though they're not hearing this thank you and shout out, it's on the recording. I'm grateful that they could be here and share their thoughts as well. And she hasn't fully identified herself, but Stacy too is someone who represents the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissioners. So I'm really grateful that she was able to join us and will hopefully continue to share her wisdom with us. So thanks.
Thank you all so much. Final thought is that we're going to have summaries in several languages about each of these regulatory sections on the Conservation Commission website. So if leaving this meeting, you're doing a public comment and you have a clarifying question, those summary documents will be available to you starting tomorrow morning. Or tomorrow by the end of the day. With that, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening and reach out anytime with any questions. Good night. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.